South Korea's homegrown Nuri space rocket places more than a dozen satellites into orbit on Thursday, marking a fourth successful mission. We have more on this latest launch and its implications today. Hello and welcome to Press Perspective. It's Thursday, November 27th here in South Korea, and this particular day is also going down in history to mark another advancement in South Korea's space ambitions as the country's Nuri space rocket was launched successfully for the fourth flight to place 13 satellites into orbit in the wee hours of this Thursday. For more on this latest launch and other stories, I have freelance journalist Raphael Rashid here in the studio. Raphael, welcome back.
Good to be here.
I also have writer Colin Marshall with the pundit's take on today's topics. Colin, it's great to have you here.
Glad to be here, thank you.
Raphael, let's begin then with the foreign media coverage of South Korea's latest space launch.
Yeah, I think international media coverage of this morning's Nuri launch, I think was remarkably positive, with major wires or outlets emphasizing South Korea's growing space capabilities, ambitions, and also strategic positioning in the Asia region. The Associated Press highlighted that this was South Korea's largest satellite launched in what it termed an ambitious space mission. Then we also had Reuters that focused on the successful deployment of both the main satellite and also the 12 microsatellites. I think the coverage, essentially framed this launch within the context of maybe regional competition as well. The AP noted that the future launches are designed to advance the country's space technologies and industries and also reduce the reliance on other nations, but also to close the gap with other Asian powers, notably China, India, and Japan. So I think this kind of competitive framing appears to be key in international reporting because, of course, many countries around the world have their own space industries. And I think they paid a lot of attention to of course, the technological or technical specifications and scientific capabilities. We saw the AP described how the main satellite carries a wide range airglow camera to observe auroral activity and separate systems for measuring plasma and magnetic fields, and also for the testing of how life science experiments perform in space. So that will be very exciting to see, if and when we get the results. So I think there was a bit of also, coverage on the smaller cube satellites that were developed by university teams, and these smaller satellites include GPS systems for atmospheric studies and also infrared cameras to track plastics in the oceans around the world. So I think this was also presented as South Korea's kind of comprehensive kind of scientific or space research agenda. And also, I think there was a little bit of talk about South Korea's kind of journey coming here, not relying too much on others, because, of course, in the past, South Korea has relied on other nations for its launches of satellites since the 1990s, and notably the US. So I think this kind of technological advancement and development has been heavily emphasized. Again, South Korea's persistence, and I'm sure that there will be a lot more interest in this kind of industry in South Korea going forward.
Right. Here on the local front, Colin, this latest launch made a bit of headlines because it was the first by a private company, that is Hanwha Aerospace. This being said, what is the significance of South Korea joining the so-called new space era of private entity space explorations?
Yes, this has been the narrative of space exploration as we get deeper into the 21st century. In the 20th century, the U.S. still is leading the way in space exploration, but it was really, along with the Soviet Union, the only game in town for a while there. And it was all about NASA, the state space organization, the state space agency. And they were handling everything. From any kind of mission it was, a satellite launched, whatever it might be, they were doing it all. And as time went on, it became more diversified in how these projects were handled. It wasn't just NASA, it was also private enterprise, and most recently, in the 21st century, I believe launched in 2002, the company SpaceX, famously founded by Elon Musk, which takes the bulk of the attention these days as far as space-related news in the U.S., space industry-related news in the U.S. They sort of suck the air out of the room. People wonder, is NASA still around? It's to that extent. They are still around, and in fact, SpaceX works with NASA a great deal, and the U.S. government in general. That's where their contracts come from in large part, but this is the way it's been going in the U.S., sort of from only public to public-private partnership to, you're seeing more and more of the burden being taken on by private enterprise. And so it has happened in Korea as well on a much more compressed timeline. The Korean space program goes back to actually the 1950s in a way, if you want to take the longest possible view, but really since the 1980s with the formation of what was then called KIRA, the space agency here in Korea. Now it's KASA, rebranded last year. And it was KASA and Hanwha Aerospace that has handled this latest launch of the Nuri, the latest version of the Nuri. And the Nuri has been a sort of long-term project as well. Multiple different rockets launched in different years. And over time, over these launches, more and more of the work has been transferred to Hanwha Aerospace. So it's becoming more and more privatized, you could say, with further planned technology transfers ahead of us. So this is not the last we've heard of Hanwha taking over more of the job of Korean space launches, but also there are startups run by sort of KAIST students and other young space professionals. So it is a more diverse space than you might think. But this whole story, it brings back a memory of an earlier Nuri launch. I happened to see, I was walking through the Uljuro Jiha Bodo, if you know where that is, the underground walkway downtown. And there's a lot of sort of old school shops there and cafes, mostly patronized by older people. And I happened to be walking through there as the TVs were all tuned in to this first successful Nuri launch. And all of these people were watching. Their sort of eyes were fixed on the TVs down there. And I was thinking, boy, these people of this generation, Koreans of this generation, they experienced a country that was poorer than sub-Saharan Africa. And now they're watching rocket launches on TV. That's not bad at all.
We've come a long way.
Come a long way, yes.
Raphael, could you tell us a bit about the size of the global space market and where do competing countries currently stand?
Yeah, I think the global space economy as a whole has reached an extraordinary scale, especially over the past, decade or 2 decades. The industry itself, I mean, there are different estimates out there, but some say it's anywhere between 500 and $600 billion, with commercial activities now accounting for roughly 80% of the total industry value in 2024. And also looking ahead, we're seeing projections saying that there will be dramatic expansion in this industry. Some put a price tag of $2 trillion by 2040, making space one of the fastest growing economic sectors globally. So of course, I think this is one of the reasons why South Korea is so keen to kind of get its foot in the door. But of course, when we look more closely, this kind of competitive landscape actually reveals, quite a stark concentration when it comes to just a handful of nations. Of course, the US, as Colin has just pointed out, I think maintains overwhelming dominance in this sector, commanding around 60% of global government space budgets at around $80 billion last year. And also, of course, American companies are attracting a bulk of the private investments, 60% of global space investments. And of course, again, as Colin mentioned, we can't not talk about SpaceX, which is responsible for the majority of US launches last year. Of course, after the US, we have China that has emerged as the clear kind of second-tier power, holding around 15% of global government space budgets at approximately $20 billion. And again, this has grown rapidly, considering that this spending was only around 2% in the year 2000. And also Beijing had conducted around, I think it was 68 launches just last year. And again, plenty more investments in the private sector. Then when we move to the mid-tier level, we have Japan that commands about 5% of this global budget spending. at around $7 billion, and then we have Russia at around $4 billion, then we have France. But of course, when we talk about Russia, it's unclear how Moscow's role will be going over the next few years because of of course, due to the sanctions, the war in Ukraine. Then, of course, we have India that presents an interesting case. They're investing heavily and also getting a lot of private investments. Then we have South Korea. At the moment, the budget is around just over $1 billion. But I think, they're already ranking around in the top 10 globally. But the Korea Space Agency, the KASA, has set ambitious targets for South Korea to become a top 5 space power by the year 2045, aiming to have kind of 10% of the global market share, worth approximately $300 billion. But this would, of course, rival the semiconductor industry as well. So I think certainly there's a lot of competition around the world, but also in this region, but also a lot of ambition.
Right, and speaking about South Korea, Raphael, quite a number of observers have chosen to connect South Korea's advances in space exploration to the efforts made by North Korea. What do you believe perhaps are the broader implications of this comparison, this connection?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of analysts have been frequent in comparing South Korea and North Korea's space programs. And I think this also reflects deeper geopolitical kind of complexities in the region, beyond the technological capabilities, regardless of which side of the border we're talking about. Both nations are pursuing space capabilities, but I think this is through fundamentally different lenses. South Korea seeks technological dependence, of course, and regional monitoring capabilities, whilst I think North Korea's efforts in the space industry serve strategic goals, including surveillance on adversaries, and also enhanced targeting potential for its nuclear arsenal. So I think this connection, in a way, I understand why people make such a connection, but this also maybe it kind of intensifies regional kind of security dynamics in ways, for example, the race to develop reconnaissance satellites, of course, and this might escalate surveillance competition in the region. So, I do think that this, in the long run, I don't want to talk too negatively, but it could create kind of new dynamics or even miscalculations that could potentially maybe destabilize the peninsula. Of course, North Korea's space program and efforts are aided by Russia, and I think this also again poses security threats not only to South Korea but also to the United States and to Japan, of course, and other allied countries. So it's only natural in a way for South Korea to respond, strengthening domestic satellite programs and also forging tighter space alliances around the world that it is currently doing. So I think this kind of space competition, it also, in a way, South Korea finds itself again in the middle. It deepens kind of broader great power competition. South Korea's achievements, of course, in the past have been linked very strongly to the United States strategic interests and, of course, a lot of collaboration with the United States, whereas we have North Korea, of course, seeking technology transfers from Russia, if not China. So, of course, the dynamics exists in this part of the world, in Northeast Asia, as we kind of we have the competition, of course, when it comes to military, but now it's also kind of extending to the space industry as well. Of course, South Korea will face plenty of challenges going ahead, being a relatively kind of, not being the earliest entrant into the market. And also South Korea does have challenges when it comes to its kind of hub strategy, manufacturing in one place, launches here, research there. Many complexities and challenges ahead, but also because this is such a kind of fresh era when it comes to space technologies, I think South Korea also might have, an edge, a leading edge when it comes to this kind of global market.
All right, I suppose we'll find out going forward then. Colin, let's move on to another issue of interest. Now, this year's UN Climate Change Conference, better known as COP30, came to an end last week. K-pop fans made quite a bit of headlines. For the sake of our viewers who may not have come across such coverage, could you tell us what these headlines were about and your thoughts regarding them, of course?
Yes, K-pop fans got some attention there at the 30th such conference, UN Climate Change Conference. And this is not the first time that K-pop has had a bit of a connection to this conference. I think in the 26th conference, Blackpink, the actual girl group, made videos in support of what was going on at this conference. Of course, dealing a conference about what actions to take regarding climate change, obviously. But this was more informal. This was not official. This was K-pop fans. K-pop fans for Climate Action was the name of the group. They had signs. They had costumes. They were dressed as K-pop Demon Hunters characters, I believe, or inspired by K-pop Demon Hunters, Kaedehon, as we say here. They had, let me think, what was the sign they had? Export K-pop, not fossil fuels. That was one of them. So they were going with the theme. And they were making a splash, and they were also reflecting one element of the conference itself, which was that there was a panel, an actual panel as part of the conference on K-pop and climate action. And you might think, well, what do these two have to do with each other? In a sense, they are natural. It's a natural fit because K-pop fans are very willing to be mobilized for their causes. And certain causes that are in the news or in society or on social media in the discourse do get picked up by K-pop fans. And when word spreads through their groups, through their social connections, through their online forums, they get on it. And whether that could be, a domestic issue like the impeachment of Yoon Suk-yeol, or whether it's a foreign issue like in the US, the Black Lives Matter movement, that was a big K-pop fan adopted cause as well. So in a way, climate change is it makes perfect sense as the kind of cause they would champion. And so, they've got the slogans, they have the signs, and in Brazil this year they had the venue. So we'll see if they keep it up in future conferences. But the bundle of issues K-pop fans are speaking on collectively is growing wider and wider, and it tells you something about K-pop fandom, more so I think than any particular issue, any particular cause, just how the social dynamics work. And not only do they promote their bands, which they certainly do, and that tells you a lot about how these bands have broken foreign charts, the US Billboard chart and whatnot. It also tells you just the way they can wield influence in music or in other spheres as well.
Right, and for the sake of comparison, Raphael, what can you tell us about such campaigns beyond the K-pop arena by fans elsewhere?
Sure, I think this is a really fascinating space, and I think we'll probably see a lot of research and PhDs when it comes to this in the future. And also, Colin has pointed out some of these really interesting points that these K-pop fans are carrying out when it comes to this activism. But I think this kind of fan-driven activism, extends beyond K-pop and also is within entertainment, but also in the sports arena as well. And these fans are kind of developing sophisticated climate and social justice campaigns that operate independently from their beloved or from their respective celebrities. And these movements, they're kind of multi-sector and around the world and different fandoms. If we just look, for example, at Billie Eilish, the music climate revolution, it represents one of the most institutionalized approaches, and it generated some 133,000 verified climate actions by fans during her Happier Than Ever tour, raising over $100,000 for climate causes and organizations. Even if we look, for example, at Coldplay, the band themselves, I think they've done a lot of promo and PR when it comes to kind of reducing their carbon footprint when they go around the world on tours. But they have been maybe technically ambitious, I think. With their Music of the Spheres tour, they installed some kind of kinetic energy floors that harness fan dancing to power concert elements. So of course, I think that was quite an interesting one. Also, when it comes to not just music, but even reading books, literature, the Harry Potter Alliance has operated for 2 decades as perhaps one of the longest running organized fandom, kind of activism structures, and they've mobilized fans for literacy, human rights, climate causes, through narrative frameworks from the books. So I think that was quite successful in a way. They've donated over 87,000 books and raised significant funds for disaster relief, kind of basically demonstrating how this kind of group mobilization really can achieve some social good. We've seen movements like that even in football clubs, kind of football fan clubs, and even kind of Taylor Swift fan bases as well also have that kind of stuff going on.
Right, proving that fandoms, of course, they are doing their part in shaping social change. Colin, on a more sobering note, if you will, data shows that a growing number of Koreans in their 20s and 30s are choosing to take a break from their jobs.
Yeah.
What do you suppose are some of the causes behind this phenomenon, and what might be the broader consequences?
Right. Sometimes it's a break, and many times it's quite a long break. The word break may not quite apply so easily when it's years and years of unemployment or sort of semi-employment, doing odd jobs, irregular employment. A lot of these former full-time employees are older than their 20s and 30s. They can be in their 40s. I read a stat that said, I believe it was Koreans born between 1981 and 1986. In that demographic, 30 to 40% still live with their parents, which tells you one reason they're able to quit their jobs is they're not going to starve. They can go home and eat. So they can coast. They're not under huge pressure. And as well, they're usually in Seoul. And the sort of sense is, well, it's too expensive to find a place of my own in Seoul. How can I move out, even if I had a job? And so the coverage of this issue, part of it leans toward, oh, can Seoul be made cheaper? If not, can other regions of the country where jobs could be made more appealing? Can we add more cultural facilities? What can be done to draw younger people out of Seoul so they don't take a week off work and that becomes 10, 20 years? One other concern is their parents who are feeding them. They're wondering when they can retire, and that's going to be a little harder if you have adult children living with you that you need to support indefinitely. And so these are all a sort of connected bundle of issues that reflect deeper currents in South Korean society, but it's produced as often a vogue word, a term that I think viewers might enjoy. It's called Kenguruchok, which means kangaroo tribe. And the idea is the image of the kangaroo mother with the joey, I believe it's called, in the pouch. Well, these are the kids who never leave the pouch, or they go back to the pouch. And a fitting image, I think, for a trend that is troublesome on several different levels.
Right, and it is a social concern that the government also is trying to address, of course. All right, Colin, I'm afraid that's all the time we have. Thank you so much for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you.
And Raphael, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
Right, on that note, we end this edition of Press Perspective. As always, thank you for watching. See you same time tomorrow.